The evidence folder sat on Greg's desk, thick with documentation that represented weeks of meticulous work. Inside were time-stamped photographs of Emma's science project from every angle, her handwritten research notebooks dating back 6 months, school records confirming her project timeline, the regional award certificate, and screenshots of Marcus's business proposal that featured designs so identical they could have been traced. Greg had also obtained the guest sign-in sheet from the school's science fair showcase event 8 months prior, where Marcus's signature appeared alongside the date and time, proof he'd had access to Emma's work long before his supposed innovation emerged. The lawyer Greg consulted had been initially skeptical until she reviewed the materials. Her expression had shifted from professional courtesy to genuine outrage as she compared Emma's original sketches with Marcus's polished business presentations. The sustainable energy solutions, the specific configuration of solar panel arrays combined with kinetic energy capture systems, even the terminology, all of it matched. Marcus had simply taken a 14-year-old's brilliant work, added corporate jargon, and presented it as his own groundbreaking concept. Greg began with Marcus's investors. He'd identified 3 primary backers through public business filings and LinkedIn connections. Rather than an emotional appeal, he crafted a professional email with the subject line, "Due diligence concern regarding sustainable solutions consulting." The message was brief and factual, explaining that the intellectual property forming the basis of their investment had been developed by a minor and stolen without attribution or compensation. He attached a PDF containing side-by-side comparisons, Emma's dated documentation, and school verification letters. The response came faster than Greg anticipated. The lead investor called him directly within 4 hours. The conversation was tense but productive. The investor, a woman named Patricia Chen who'd made her fortune in tech startups, was horrified. She explained that Marcus had presented himself as a self-taught innovator who'd spent years developing these concepts. The due diligence process had focused on market viability and Marcus's business credentials, not the origin of the actual designs. Patricia asked permission to share Greg's evidence with her partners and their legal team. Greg agreed with one condition: Emma's name and contribution must be properly credited in any public statements. Patricia promised to ensure it happened. The cease and desist letter went out simultaneously, drafted by Greg's attorney and sent via certified mail to Marcus, his business entity, and his registered agent. The letter demanded immediate cessation of all use of Emma's intellectual property, public acknowledgement of the theft, and financial compensation for damages. It gave Marcus 72 hours to respond before legal action would commence. Marcus's response came not through official channels, but via a furious phone call to Greg's number, one Greg had forgotten to block. The voicemail Marcus left was a masterpiece of self-incrimination. He ranted about Greg being jealous, accused him of trying to sabotage his success, and claimed that Emma's project was just a kid's school assignment that he'd improved and made viable. He never once denied having taken her work. Greg saved the voicemail and forwarded it to his attorney. The social media post required the most careful consideration. Greg wasn't interested in a rant or emotional outburst. He wanted the facts to speak for themselves. He created a detailed thread on multiple platforms, beginning with a simple statement: when your child's award-winning science project becomes someone else's business venture without permission or credit. He posted clear images of Emma's original project boards, her notebooks with visible dates, and her award certificate. Then he posted screenshots of Marcus's business materials with the matching elements highlighted. He included no names initially, letting the evidence tell the story. The post went viral within 24 hours. Local news outlets picked it up. The community rallied around Emma. Former teachers commented, verifying her work and timeline. Other parents shared similar stories of Marcus's entitled behavior over the years. Someone tagged Marcus's business page, and the connection became public knowledge. Marcus's business collapsed within a week. The investors withdrew, citing breach of contract and fraudulent misrepresentation. The funding disappeared. Marcus's professional reputation, carefully cultivated over years, disintegrated as the story spread through business networks. His social media accounts went dark after being flooded with criticism. Throughout this, Greg's parents remained conspicuously silent. No calls, no texts, no attempts at intervention. Their silence spoke volumes about their priorities and where their loyalties remained anchored. Greg drafted the letter to his parents over several evenings, Sarah reading each revision and offering suggestions. The final version was 10 pages long, single-spaced, and comprehensive. It detailed every instance of favoritism he could remember. Marcus receiving $50,000 to start his first business, while Greg was told to take out loans. Family gatherings rescheduled to accommodate Marcus's calendar, while Greg's important events were dismissed. Constant comparisons that positioned Marcus as the successful son and Greg as the disappointment. Birthday gifts that differed dramatically in value and thoughtfulness. And the final, unforgivable act of watching their grandchildren be humiliated on Christmas Eve without intervention. Greg included financial documentation he'd kept over the years, copies of bank statements showing transfers to Marcus, loan applications Greg had filed alone, receipts from family events. He'd paid for while Marcus contributed nothing. He'd been meticulous, perhaps unconsciously preparing for this moment even before he recognized its inevitability. The letter's conclusion was brief. You made your choice decades ago. Marcus was always your priority, your golden child, your investment. You enabled his entitlement, excused his behavior, and ultimately allowed him to steal from your granddaughter without consequence. You chose him over us repeatedly, and now you can live with that choice. We are done being your disappointment, your afterthought, your punchline. Do not contact us again. He sent copies to both parents via certified mail and email, ensuring they couldn't claim ignorance. The extended family members who'd pressured Greg to reconcile received a different message. A group email with the evidence of Marcus's theft attached, and a simple note explaining that reconciliation required accountability, which his parents had never demonstrated. Several family members responded with apologies and support. Others remained silent. Greg blocked those who continued to defend his parents or Marcus. Emma's vindication came through unexpected channels. A professor from the local university's engineering department who'd seen the viral posts reached out directly. She wanted to feature Emma's work in a youth innovation showcase and offer her a mentorship opportunity. Local media interviewed Emma, properly crediting her designs and highlighting her achievement. The recognition she deserved finally arrived, untainted by family politics. Greg's household transformed. The heaviness that had permeated their home since Christmas Eve gradually lifted. Emma smiled more freely. Tyler, who'd been quietly processing his own hurt, became more animated. Sarah's tension eased as she watched her family heal. They planned their own celebration for mid-January. A chosen family Christmas with friends who'd supported them, neighbors who'd become confidants, and Sarah's relatives who'd always treated Greg's children with genuine affection. Christmas morning arrived with none of the magic it should have held. Greg woke early, the house still dark, and lay staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept beside him. The events of the previous evening played on endless repeat in his mind. Brandon's cruel laughter, his parents' deliberate silence, the weight of those empty hands when every other grandchild held expensive gifts. Most haunting of all was the image of Emma's face. That moment when understanding crashed over her that she'd been intentionally excluded, publicly marked as less worthy than her cousin. The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled Greg from his thoughts. He found Tyler sitting on the stairs in his pajamas, staring at the Christmas tree they decorated together weeks ago. The lights cast colored shadows across his son's face, highlighting the redness around his eyes that suggested he'd been crying. Tyler didn't acknowledge Greg's presence, just continued staring at the presents beneath the tree. Gifts from Greg and Sarah, from Sarah's parents, from a few close friends. Modest but thoughtful offerings that suddenly felt inadequate against the backdrop of what had happened. Emma emerged from her room an hour later, moving through the house like a ghost. She'd always been the enthusiastic one on Christmas morning, bounding down the stairs before dawn, but today she walked with her shoulders hunched, her usual brightness extinguished. When Sarah suggested opening presents, Emma shrugged with an indifference that broke Greg's heart more than tears would have. They went through the motions of Christmas morning. Wrapping paper crinkled. Thank yous were murmured with hollow politeness. Tyler managed a small smile when he opened the skateboard he'd been wanting, but it faded quickly. Emma held the art supplies she'd requested, quality materials Greg and Sarah had saved for, and simply nodded. The joy had been poisoned the day itself, contaminated by the humiliation that preceded it. Greg's phone buzzed repeatedly on the kitchen counter where he'd left it. He ignored it through breakfast, through the mechanical opening of gifts, through Sarah's increasingly concerned glances. Finally, when the kids retreated to their rooms, he picked it up. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages. The notifications created a wall of digital noise that made his jaw clench. His mother's messages came first, a progression from confusion to defensiveness. "Why did you leave so suddenly? Everyone was asking about you. You embarrassed us in front of the whole family. Call me immediately." His father's texts were shorter, angrier, unacceptable behavior. "You owe your mother an apology. Family doesn't walk out on family." Marcus's messages dripped with mockery. "Bro, seriously. Getting butthurt over Christmas presents. Your kids need to learn the world doesn't hand out participation trophies." Maybe if Emma applied herself like Brandon, she'd get something worth having. Stop being so sensitive. Greg read each message twice, feeling something cold and final settle in his chest. This wasn't surprise or shock. This was clarity. Years of accumulated hurt crystallized into a single, unavoidable truth. His parents had made their choice long ago, and nothing he did would ever change their fundamental preference for Marcus and his family. He opened a new message to his parents. His thumbs hovered over the screen for only a moment before the words flowed out with absolute certainty. "Don't ever invite us again. We're not your punchline." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response was instantaneous. His phone rang within seconds, his mother's name flashing on the screen. Greg declined the call. It rang again immediately. He declined again. Text messages flooded in, his mother's words tumbling over each other in a cascade of deflection and blame. "How dare you speak to us that way? We've done nothing." "Wrong, you're completely overreacting. This is about presents. Really? You're going to destroy this family over gifts. Your brother is right, you've always been jealous of his success. Call me right now." His father's messages followed a similar pattern, focused entirely on Greg's disrespect rather than the pain inflicted on his grandchildren. Not once did either parent acknowledge Emma and Tyler's humiliation. Not once did they express regret or concern for how their actions had affected two children who'd done nothing to deserve such treatment. Marcus sent a laughing emoji followed by, "Wow, dramatic much. Mom's crying because you can't handle reality. Grow up, Greg. Not everyone gets a trophy. Your kids need to learn that." Greg's finger moved with steady purpose, blocking each number in turn. His mother, his father, Marcus. The calls stopped. The messages ceased. The sudden silence felt like stepping out of a windstorm into calm air. Sarah found him standing in the kitchen, phone still in his hand. She didn't ask what he'd done. She simply wrapped her arms around him from behind and held on tight. They stood that way for a long time, the house quiet around them except for the muffled sounds of their children in their separate rooms, processing their own hurt in whatever ways they could manage. The extended family outreach began that evening. Greg's Aunt Linda called, her voice careful and concerned. She'd heard there was trouble, wanted to understand what happened, offered to mediate. Greg appreciated her kindness but declined. His Uncle Robert sent a text suggesting that family was forever and everyone should move past disagreements. Greg didn't respond. His cousin Jennifer, who'd always been close to Marcus, sent a long message about keeping the peace and not letting one bad night destroy decades of family bonds. But there were others. Sarah's sister called to offer support and validate Greg's decision. A few of Greg's cousins reached out privately, sharing their own stories of witnessing the favoritism over the years, expressing relief that someone had finally called it out. His Aunt Patricia, his mother's younger sister, sent a brief but powerful message. "I've watched them do this to you your entire life. I'm sorry I never said anything. You're doing the right thing for your kids." The supportive messages meant something, but they also highlighted a painful reality. People had seen, had known, had watched his parents treat him as lesser for years, and no one had intervened. The dysfunction had been normalized, accepted, allowed to continue because confronting it was uncomfortable. Greg and Sarah sat down with Emma and Tyler that evening. They gathered in the living room, the Christmas tree light still twinkling with oblivious cheer. Greg had rehearsed what he wanted to say, but when he looked at his children's faces, Emma's guarded expression, Tyler's barely concealed hurt, the prepared words dissolved. Instead, he spoke from the heart. He told them that what happened at their grandparents' house was wrong, unacceptable, and had nothing to do with their worth or value. He explained that sometimes adults make terrible choices, that favoritism exists even in families, and that being treated poorly by people who should love you unconditionally isn't a reflection of your inadequacy, but of their failure. Sarah added that they deserved better, that they would always deserve better, and that protecting them meant sometimes cutting ties with people who refused to treat them with basic respect and dignity. Emma cried then, really cried, and asked the question Greg had been dreading. Why don't they love us as much as Brandon? Greg had no good answer because there was no good answer. He could only hold his daughter and tell her the truth, that he didn't know, that it wasn't fair, that it had nothing to do with who she was and everything to do with who they were. Tyler, quieter but equally wounded, asked if they'd ever see their grandparents again. Greg exchanged a glance with Sarah before responding honestly, not unless things changed dramatically, and he didn't believe they would. The conversation lasted hours. They talked about the years of subtle differences, the ways Marcus had always been elevated while Greg was diminished, how that pattern had extended to the grandchildren. Emma admitted she'd noticed it before but thought she was imagining things. Tyler confessed he'd always felt like Brandon was the favorite, but assumed it was because Brandon was older. As Greg listened to his children articulate observations they'd been quietly making for years, a new layer of anger emerged. His parents hadn't just hurt him. They'd been hurting his children, slowly and consistently, teaching them they were worth less through 1,000 small actions and omissions. That night, after Emma and Tyler finally went to bed, Greg sat alone in his home office and began writing. He started documenting everything he could. Remember, every instance of favoritism, every financial disparity, every celebration centered around Marcus while his own achievements were dismissed. The list grew longer than he expected, spanning decades, revealing a pattern so consistent it couldn't be accidental or unconscious. Marcus getting $50,000 to start his first business, while Greg was told to figure it out on his own. Family gatherings rescheduled to accommodate Marcus's calendar, while Greg's important events were treated as negotiable. Birthday gifts that differed dramatically in value. The constant comparisons that positioned Marcus as the golden child and Greg as the perpetual disappointment. Greg had spent years making excuses, convincing himself it wasn't that bad, that he was being too sensitive, that family was complicated. But seeing it laid out in black and white, documented with dates and details, made the truth undeniable. His parents had chosen Marcus long ago, and that choice had shaped every family dynamic since. The question now wasn't whether to maintain the relationship. That decision had been made the moment he sent that text. The question was what came next, how to move forward, how to build something better for his own family from the wreckage of what his parents had destroyed. Greg saved the document, backed it up in multiple locations, and closed his laptop. Tomorrow he would continue processing, continue healing, continue protecting his children from people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted with their hearts. Tonight, he simply sat in the darkness and felt the weight of liberation beginning to replace the weight of obligation. The 2 weeks following Christmas passed in a strange limbo. Greg's household settled into a new rhythm, one defined by absence rather than presence. No calls from his parents, no holiday follow-up texts, no awkward attempts at reconciliation. The silence from his family of origin felt both liberating and unsettling, like standing in a room where loud machinery had suddenly stopped, the quiet itself a presence. Emma returned to school with visible reluctance. The winter break had provided shelter from questions she wasn't ready to answer, from the social performance required of teenagers navigating complex emotions. Tyler bounced back faster, his resilience aided by the shorter memory of childhood, though Greg noticed him checking his phone more frequently, perhaps hoping for a message that never came. Sarah threw herself into work, her law firm busy with post-holiday cases. Greg maintained his routine, his job as a civil engineer providing the steady income and benefits that had always made him the responsible one, the stable one, even as his parents celebrated Marcus's flashier entrepreneurial ventures. The irony wasn't lost on him that his reliability had somehow counted for less than Marcus's risk-taking in their parents' estimation. The afternoon Emma came home early. Greg was in his home office reviewing blueprints for a municipal water treatment facility. He heard the front door open and close with unusual force, followed by footsteps that were too heavy, too quick. Something was wrong. He found Emma in the kitchen, her backpack dropped carelessly on the floor, her face blotchy with tears she was trying to suppress. She stood at the sink with her back to him, shoulders rigid with the effort of holding herself together. Greg's heart lurched. His mind immediately went to the worst possibilities, bullying, academic failure, social cruelty of the kind that defined teenage existence. He approached carefully, keeping his voice gentle. Emma turned, and the devastation in her eyes made him catch his breath. She wasn't just upset, she was shattered. The story came out in fragments, interrupted by tears and angry swipes at her face. Her science project, the one she'd spent 6 months developing, the sustainable energy solution that had won regional recognition and been featured in the school newsletter, was gone, stolen from the locked display case in the school's main hallway where award-winning projects were showcased. Greg felt his protective instincts surge. He asked questions, trying to understand the timeline, the security measures, who had access. Emma explained that the display case was in a high-traffic area monitored by cameras, but the theft had apparently occurred over the weekend when the building was less supervised. The school administration had been apologetic, but offered little beyond promises to review security footage and file an internal report. The project itself represented hundreds of hours of work. Emma had designed a hybrid system combining solar panel efficiency improvements with kinetic energy capture from foot traffic, a concept she developed after researching sustainable solutions for urban environments. Her prototype had been crude but functional, demonstrating the principle with impressive results. The research notebooks, the calculations, the iterative design process, all of it documented her intellectual journey from concept to execution. Greg filed a police report that afternoon, Emma sitting beside him at the station, recounting details to an officer who seemed sympathetic but realistic about recovery prospects. School theft cases rarely resulted in returned property. The items were usually discarded once the thief realized they had no practical value. The officer took photos of Emma's backup documentation, her research notebooks, and the award certificate, but his expression suggested he'd seen this story end badly many times before. The investigation stalled almost immediately. The school's security footage showed nothing useful. The camera angle didn't capture the display case directly, and the weekend traffic was minimal. No witnesses came forward. The physical evidence was non-existent. Within days, it became clear that Emma's project was simply gone. Her months of work vanished into whatever void consumed stolen. School property. Emma withdrew into herself, the loss compounding the hurt from Christmas. Greg watched his daughter's confidence erode, her enthusiasm for science dimming. She stopped talking about the mentorship program she'd been excited about, stopped checking the engineering websites she'd bookmarked. The theft had stolen more than a project. It had stolen her belief that her work mattered, that her efforts would be recognized and protected. Then, 3 days after the police report, Greg received a LinkedIn notification. A former colleague, someone he'd worked with years ago at a different firm, had tagged him in a post celebrating innovative startups in the region. The post featured several local entrepreneurs, and one name jumped out immediately: Marcus Henderson, founder of Sustainable Solutions Consulting. Greg clicked through to Marcus's business page with a sense of creeping dread. The company description promised cutting-edge sustainable energy solutions for urban environments. The promotional materials featured sleek graphics and professional photography. And there in the center of Marcus's pitch deck was a design that made Greg's blood run cold. The hybrid system combining solar efficiency improvements with kinetic energy capture. The specific configuration Emma had developed. The terminology she'd coined. The implementation strategy she'd outlined in her research. All of it was there, repackaged with corporate polish but fundamentally identical to his daughter's work. Greg sat frozen, staring at the screen, his mind racing through implications and connections. Marcus had attended the school's science fair showcase 8 months earlier, a family event where Greg's parents had made a rare appearance to support Emma. Greg remembered Marcus walking through the displays, phone in hand, supposedly taking photos to share with his parents. He'd spent several minutes at Emma's booth, asking questions, seeming genuinely interested in her work. The theft hadn't been random. It had been targeted, calculated, and executed by someone who'd recognized the value in a 14-year-old's innovation and decided to claim it as his own. Greg began systematically documenting everything. He downloaded Marcus's entire business website, saved every image and document, captured screenshots with timestamps. He pulled up Emma's original project photos from his phone, the ones he'd taken at the science fair with visible dates embedded in the metadata. He gathered her research notebooks, her award certificates, her school records showing the project timeline. The evidence was overwhelming. Side-by-side comparisons revealed not just similarity but virtual identity. Marcus had taken Emma's core concept, her specific design elements, even her phrasing in some sections, and presented them as his own innovative breakthrough. The business materials claimed Marcus had spent years developing these solutions, that his background in entrepreneurship had led. To these insights, it was fraud, it was theft, and it was being used to secure funding and build a business that would profit from a child's stolen work. Greg contacted a lawyer that afternoon, someone Sarah knew through her firm who specialized in intellectual property cases. The consultation was supposed to be exploratory, a fact-finding mission to understand their options. But as Greg laid out the evidence, the timeline, the documentation, the identical designs, the lawyer's expression shifted from professional interest to genuine outrage. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Torres, explained that they had multiple angles of attack. Intellectual property theft, even from a minor, was actionable. The fact that Marcus was profiting from the stolen work added fraud charges. The documented timeline and Emma's prior public recognition established clear ownership. The case was strong, potentially devastating for Marcus if pursued aggressively. Rebecca asked the question Greg had been avoiding. What did he want the outcome to be? Recovery of credit for Emma, financial compensation, criminal charges, the destruction of Marcus's business venture. Greg thought about his daughter's face when she'd come home devastated. He thought about years of watching Marcus skate through life on charm and entitlement, always landing on his feet because their parents cushioned every fall. He thought about Christmas Eve, about Brandon's mockery, about his parents' silence in the face of cruelty toward their grandchildren. He thought about the pattern that had defined his entire life: Marcus taking, Greg accommodating, their parents enabling, the cycle perpetuating because no one ever imposed consequences. The anger that had been simmering since Christmas crystallized into something colder, sharper, more focused. This wasn't just about Emma's project. This was about every time Marcus had been allowed to take without giving, to hurt without accountability, to succeed on the backs of others' work while being celebrated as innovative and brilliant. Greg looked at Rebecca and spoke with absolute clarity. He wanted everything. He wanted Marcus's business destroyed. He wanted the investors to know they'd been defrauded. He wanted public acknowledgement of the theft. He wanted Emma's work properly credited. And he wanted his parents to see, finally and irrevocably, what their golden child really was. Rebecca smiled, the expression of someone who'd just been given permission to do what she did best. She explained the strategy. Contact the investors first with documented proof, file cease and desist letters, prepare for potential litigation, and create a public record that would follow Marcus professionally for years. The goal wasn't just legal victory, but complete exposure, making the theft so public and so documented that Marcus's reputation would be permanently tarnished. Greg authorized her to proceed with everything. He signed retainer agreements, provided access to all documentation, and gave permission for aggressive pursuit of every legal avenue. The cost would be significant, but Sarah's income and their savings could absorb it. More importantly, the cost of doing nothing, of teaching his children that theft and cruelty went unpunished, that family loyalty meant accepting abuse, was infinitely higher. That evening, Greg sat with Emma and explained what he discovered. He showed her the evidence carefully, watching her face cycle through disbelief, hurt, and finally burning anger. She asked why Brandon's father would steal from her, why anyone would take a kid's school project and pretend it was their own innovation. Greg had no good answer except the truth, because Marcus had always taken what he wanted and no one had ever made him stop. But that was changing. Greg explained the legal strategy, the steps they were taking, the likelihood of success. He promised Emma that her work would be recognized, that the theft wouldn't stand, that sometimes justice required fighting for it rather than waiting for it to arrive. Emma asked if this would cause more family problems, if fighting back would make things worse with her grandparents. The question revealed how deeply the Christmas Eve humiliation had affected her. She was still worried about causing trouble, about being the problem, even after being victimized. Greg pulled his daughter close and told her something he should have said years ago. Some family problems needed to get worse before they could get better, and protecting her was more important than keeping peace with people who'd proven they didn't value her. Sarah joined them, and together they talked through what came next. The legal process would take time. There would be confrontation, probably ugly. Marcus would fight back, and their parents would likely defend him. The extended family would be drawn in, forced to choose sides. It would be messy and painful and public, but Emma's work would be vindicated. The truth would be documented, and Marcus would finally face consequences for treating other people's achievements as resources to be exploited. Tyler wandered in during the conversation, sensing something significant was happening. When they explained the situation in terms he could understand, his response was immediate and fierce. His uncle was a thief, and thieves should be punished. The simplicity of childhood morality cut through all the complicated family dynamics and landed on the essential truth. Greg spent the rest of the evening organizing evidence with Rebecca's guidance. Every photo, every document, every piece of proof was cataloged and backed up. He created a timeline showing Emma's project development alongside Marcus's business launch, the overlap making the theft obvious. He gathered contact information for Marcus's investors, identified through business filings and social media connections. The plan was comprehensive and ruthless. Contact investors with evidence, destroying their confidence in Marcus's integrity. File legal complaints establishing the theft formally. Create a public record through social media and local media contacts, ensuring the story spread beyond just legal channels. Pursue every avenue simultaneously, overwhelming Marcus's ability to respond or spin the narrative. Rebecca warned that Marcus would likely claim coincidence, that sustainable energy solutions were common concepts. That similarity didn't prove theft. But the evidence was too specific, too detailed, too perfectly aligned. The timestamps alone destroyed any defense of independent development. Marcus had attended Emma's showcase, had access to her work, and had launched his business using identical concepts within months. The pattern was damning. As Greg prepared for bed that night, Sarah asked if he was sure about the path they were choosing. Once they started this process, there would be no going back. The family rupture would become permanent and public. His parents would have to confront what Marcus had done, and their response would define the relationship forever. Greg thought about Emma's devastated face, about Tyler's simple moral clarity, about years of watching his brother take and take while being celebrated for it. He thought about the document he'd created after Christmas, cataloging decades of favoritism and enabling. He thought about the pattern that would continue unless someone finally said enough. He told Sarah he'd never been more certain of anything. This wasn't just about one stolen project. This was about breaking a cycle that had poisoned his entire life, about teaching his children that standing up for themselves mattered more than maintaining false peace, about finally imposing consequences on someone who'd never faced them. The next morning, Greg sent the first email to Marcus's investors. The subject line was simple and professional. Urgent due diligence concern regarding sustainable solutions consulting. The message was brief, factual, and devastating. He attached a comprehensive PDF containing side-by-side comparisons, Emma's documented timeline, school verification, and Marcus's business materials. Then he waited for the explosion he knew was coming. The response from Patricia Chen arrived within 4 hours, faster than Greg had anticipated. Her email was brief and professional, but he could sense the fury beneath the corporate language. She requested a phone call at his earliest convenience. Greg dialed immediately. Patricia's voice was tight with controlled anger. She explained that she'd built her career on identifying genuine innovation, on supporting entrepreneurs who brought authentic value to the market. Being deceived wasn't just a financial concern, it was a personal betrayal of everything she'd worked to build. She'd already shared Greg's evidence with her 2 partners, and they were unanimous in their response. They wanted out immediately and completely. She asked pointed questions about Emma's timeline, about the school's verification process, about the strength of the documentation. Greg answered each one, sending additional materials as requested. Patricia's legal team would review everything, but she was already convinced. The evidence was too comprehensive, too damning. Marcus had committed fraud, and her firm's reputation was now tied to that fraud unless they acted decisively. Before ending the call, Patricia made an unexpected offer. She wanted to meet Emma, to hear directly from her about the project and her vision for sustainable energy solutions. Not as an investor in Marcus's stolen venture, but as someone genuinely interested in supporting young innovators who'd been wronged. Greg felt something loosen in his chest, vindication arriving from an unexpected source. The cease and desist letter arrived at Marcus's business address via courier that same afternoon. Rebecca had crafted it with surgical precision, outlining every legal violation, every instance of intellectual property theft, every fraudulent claim Marcus had made to investors and potential clients. The letter demanded immediate cessation of all business activities using Emma's designs, public acknowledgement of the theft, and financial compensation for damages. Marcus had 72 hours to respond before they would file formal legal complaints and pursue criminal charges. Greg knew Marcus wouldn't respond through proper channels. His brother had never operated within established rules when he could circumvent them. The prediction proved accurate within hours. His phone rang at 8 that evening, an unknown number he almost didn't answer. Marcus's voice exploded through the speaker before Greg could speak, a torrent of rage and accusation that confirmed everything Greg had believed about his brother's character. Marcus ranted about jealousy, about Greg's pathetic attempts to sabotage his success, about how Emma's little school project was just a kid's assignment that he'd improved and made actually viable for the real world. Greg said nothing, just let Marcus talk, let him incriminate himself with every word. The voicemail Marcus had left earlier that day had been useful, but this live recording was even better. Marcus never once denied taking Emma's work. Instead, he justified it, minimized it, claimed ownership through the act of making it commercially viable. He called Greg a failure who couldn't stand watching his brother succeed. He said Emma should be grateful someone had seen potential in her amateur efforts. When Marcus finally paused for breath, Greg spoke calmly. He informed his brother that the call was being recorded, that the recording would be provided to his attorney and to Marcus's investors, and that every word Marcus had just spoken constituted admission of theft and fraud. Then he ended the call and immediately forwarded the audio file to Rebecca. Her response was immediate. "This is better than I hoped." He just destroyed any possible defense. The social media post required careful consideration. Greg wasn't interested in an emotional rant or a vindictive attack. He wanted the facts to speak with undeniable clarity. He spent 2 hours crafting the thread, running each version past Sarah, refining the language until it struck the perfect balance of factual presentation and emotional impact. He posted simultaneously across multiple platforms, beginning with a simple statement. When your 14-year-old daughter's award-winning science project becomes someone else's business venture without permission, credit, or compensation. The first image showed Emma at her school science fair, standing proudly beside her project display, the date stamp clearly visible. The second image showed her research notebook, pages filled with calculations and sketches, dates marking months of development. The third showed her regional award certificate. Then came the comparison images, Marcus's business website. Screenshots placed directly beside Emma's original project photos. The solar panel configuration, identical. The kinetic energy capture system, identical. The implementation strategy, identical. Even specific terminology matched word for word. Greg highlighted the matching elements in red, making the theft visually undeniable. The final images showed the timeline. Emma's project showcase in April, Marcus's business launch in September, his investor pitch deck in November. The pattern was clear, documented, irrefutable. Greg included no names in the initial post, but he didn't need to. He tagged the local news outlets that had covered Emma's science fair victory. He tagged the school district. He tagged the regional science competition organization. The post went live at 9 p.m., and Greg watched the engagement numbers climb. Within an hour, former teachers were commenting, verifying Emma's work and praising her innovation. Other parents shared stories of watching Emma develop her project. Over months of dedicated effort, someone found and shared the school newsletter feature about her award. The community rallied with a speed and intensity that surprised Greg. By midnight, someone had identified Marcus's business page and tagged it in the comments. The connection became public knowledge. Marcus's professional social media accounts, carefully curated to present an image of innovative entrepreneurship, were flooded with comments demanding explanation. His business page's rating plummeted as people left one-star reviews describing the theft. Local news outlets picked up the story by morning. A reporter from the regional paper called Greg, requesting an interview. He agreed with one condition: Emma would be part of the conversation, her voice centered in the narrative. The resulting article was published online within hours, featuring Emma's photo beside her original project, her own words describing the development process and the devastation of having her work stolen by family member. The article went viral in their community. It was shared thousands of times, picked up by state news outlets, discussed on local radio programs. The story had everything: a talented young student, intellectual property theft, family betrayal, and a clear villain in Marcus who'd stolen from a child for profit. Marcus's business collapsed with stunning speed. Patricia Chen's firm issued a public statement announcing their withdrawal from Sustainable Solutions Consulting, citing fraudulent misrepresentation of intellectual property ownership. The other investors followed within hours, their own statements carefully worded to distance themselves from Marcus's actions while expressing support for proper attribution of Emma's work. Without funding, without investor backing, without the reputation he'd carefully built, Marcus's business became worthless overnight. His website went dark. His social media accounts were deleted after being overwhelmed with criticism. Former colleagues and business contacts publicly distanced themselves. The professional network he'd cultivated over years evaporated as people recognized the reputational risk of association. Greg watched it unfold with cold satisfaction. This was what consequences looked like when they finally arrived for someone who'd spent a lifetime avoiding them. Throughout the destruction of Marcus's business, Greg's parents remained conspicuously silent. No calls, no texts, no attempts to defend their son or attack Greg. Their silence was its own form of communication. They'd chosen their side long ago, and even overwhelming evidence of Marcus's wrongdoing wouldn't change their fundamental loyalty. That silence made Greg's next step easier. He'd been drafting the letter to his parents for days, refining it each evening after Emma and Tyler went to bed. The final version was 10 pages, single-spaced, comprehensive in its documentation of decades of favoritism and enabling. He detailed every instance he could remember. Marcus receiving $50,000 to start his first business while Greg was told to take out loans and figure it out himself. Family gatherings consistently rescheduled to accommodate Marcus's calendar while Greg's important events, his college graduation, his wedding, the births of his children, were treated as negotiable or inconvenient. Birthday and Christmas gifts that differed dramatically in value and thoughtfulness, the disparity so consistent it couldn't be accidental. Greg included financial documentation he'd kept over the years, bank statements showing transfers to Marcus. Loan applications, Greg had filed a loan while his parents claimed they couldn't help financially. Receipts from family events Greg had paid for while Marcus contributed nothing, but still received credit for organizing. He wrote about the constant comparisons, the way every conversation somehow circled back to Marcus's achievements while Greg's accomplishments were dismissed or minimized, how Marcus's risky business ventures were celebrated as bold entrepreneurship while Greg's stable career was treated as boring and unambitious, how Marcus's parenting was praised while Greg's was scrutinized. The letter's conclusion was brief but final. You made your choice decades ago. Marcus was always your priority, your golden child, your investment. You enabled his entitlement, excused his behavior, and ultimately allowed him to steal from your granddaughter without consequence. You chose him over us repeatedly, and now you can live with that choice. We are done being your disappointment, your afterthought, your punchline. Do not contact us again. Greg sent copies via certified mail and email, ensuring they couldn't claim ignorance. He felt no guilt, no hesitation, only relief that he'd finally articulated what had been true his entire life. The extended family members who'd pressured Greg to reconcile after Christmas received their own message, a group email with evidence of Marcus's theft attached and a simple note: reconciliation requires accountability. My parents have never demonstrated that capacity. I'm protecting my children from people who have proven they can't be trusted with their hearts. Several family members responded with apologies and support. Others remained silent. A few attempted to defend his parents or Marcus, claiming family should forgive, that Greg was being too harsh. He blocked those numbers without response. Emma's vindication came through channels Greg hadn't anticipated. The university professor who'd reached out after seeing the viral posts offered Emma a formal mentorship in the engineering department's youth program. Local media featured her story multiple times, always properly crediting her innovation and highlighting her achievement. A regional STEM organization invited her to present at their annual conference. The recognition Emma deserved finally arrived, untainted by family politics or theft. Greg watched, his daughter's confidence slowly rebuild, her enthusiasm for science returning as she realized her work had value that no one could steal or diminish. Their household transformed. The heaviness that had permeated their home since Christmas gradually lifted. Emma smiled more freely, her natural brightness returning. Tyler became more animated, his own hurt healing as he watched his sister vindicated. Sarah's tension eased as she watched her family recover and strengthen. They planned their own celebration for mid-January, a chosen family Christmas with friends who'd supported them, neighbors who'd become confidants, and Sarah's relatives who'd always treated Greg's children with genuine affection and respect. The gathering was smaller than his parents' elaborate parties, but infinitely warmer. Emma and Tyler laughed without guardedness, secure in the knowledge that everyone present valued them equally. Greg stood in his kitchen, watching his family and chosen community celebrate together, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with his decisions. He'd protected his children, imposed consequences on someone who'd never faced them, and freed his family from a toxic dynamic that had poisoned his entire life. His phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. Marcus had hired an attorney who was making noise about defamation and harassment. Rebecca's response had been to send them the recorded phone call, the documented evidence, and a promise of aggressive counter-litigation if they proceeded. Marcus's attorney had gone silent immediately after. Greg deleted the message and returned to the celebration. Marcus, his parents, the decades of favoritism and pain, all of it belonged to a past he was finally free from. The future held only what he chose to build with people who deserved his loyalty and love. Emma caught his eye across the room and smiled, genuine and unguarded. In that moment, Greg knew he'd made every right choice. His daughter was healing, his family was whole, and the cycle was finally, irrevocably broken.